started touching environmental markets when I was at Spectron, the broker. Sort of environmental markets were sort of about to come into being, the European ETS. So started learning about these markets with respect to a European focus. But having said that, I ran an environmental business in the US between 2006 and 2011. And you learn as a Brit or a European, you think it all started in Europe, but actually there's the SO2 and NOx program sort of predates it. So I also had exposure to that emissions cap and trade program, which I guess is probably the founding father of environmental markets. I can tell you that according to the data, it worked. Right, no one's talking about SO2 and NOx being a problem anymore, and so as far as I'm aware, it was a successful program. It sort of did its job. It's very diverse. It depends on where you are on the evolution of the liquidity cycle. But if you look at, say, what I would call a benchmark contract, an EUA would qualify as a benchmark like a Brent or a TTF. The profile of participants are very similar. There's a very broad mix. There's commercials, but there's also financial participation as well. It's a bit of a hot topic in Europe at the moment. It's being debated whether financial participants should be involved in the ETS, and it's very clear to me they should, because if you want liquidity, you need a diverse pool of participants, and all the most successful benchmarks have a diverse pool of participants. So you got CCA, California Carbon, and you got RGGI in the US. The CCA is definitely the leader in terms of liquidity from a US perspective, and is also clearly a lot bigger in terms of cap as well. Let's call it 500 million tons versus a cap in the EUA of, say, 1.5 billion, and RGGI maybe 120, 130. So California is the biggest in terms of the cap, but also it's the most liquid, and I would say that liquidity pool is sort of making that same pathway that EUA was, so it's getting increasingly diverse. We need to reduce our emissions, so the cap is going to decrease over time, and the market will get increasingly short. So the price drivers are government policies being set that we want to meet a net zero pathway, which means a more aggressive cap, and so the market is short, and so the price is appreciating to get to effectively the marginal abatement cost. So that's ultimately the driver. What is the cost of carbon that needs to clear the system to meet that pathway? The Green Exchange was a bet on a federal cap and trade in the US, and that didn't happen. I think that one of the other reasons it didn't work is it didn't have the right liquidity providers, because it was first seemed to be a bet on the US. It was focused on US participants, but actually what you needed in the room were European participants to pay the bills, and it basically ran out of track. We're spending a lot of time in discussing what we just talked about, the science, because I find myself in a lot of meetings talking about people who are committing to net zero, and you kind of ask them, why are you committing to net zero? And it's sort of a case of, well, because there's a group of people over there telling us we need to do it. And then you go, okay, well, why are they doing it? And then it's well, there's another group of people behind them saying they should do it. And I kind of like go, well, we sat in a room for 5 or 10 minutes now trying to establish why we do it, and we've not even talked about the science, which is kind of, I think that's a big gap. So what we're trying to do at the moment is take it back to, rather than jumping into the how, talking about talking about the why. And I think that makes it far more powerful. It gives you more of a sense of purpose if you frame it in that you're providing price signals for people to solve the problem of protecting this atmospheric carbon budget, then that's really powerful. Well, anyone under a cap and trade system. So it depends on the cap and trade design. So it's an important point. So if you look at the EUA market is the big in terms of overall tons covered, but in terms of the percentage of the economy covered, it's actually California is the leader because they cover heating and they cover transportation. So that covers 80% of the economy. Europe's more like 40%. The UK is, say, 35%. The UK is lower because we've been more successful in decarbonizing electricity versus Europe. So we've largely moved coal out of the merit order. Europe's still got some work to do, but California, 80% of the economy is covered, and the polluters have to pay for their allowances. If you were to offset it, you would retire it. So you bought it, taken it out of circulation, and you retire it in a registry. So in a cap and trade, in an allowance market, you'll be retiring it in the registry of the government agency. In a carbon credit market, you're going to be retiring it in the registry of a standard provider. So that could be a Vera, Gold Standard, ACR, and CAR. So they're all sort of vertically integrated standard providers and registry providers. And so if you buy one of those credits and then you retire it in the registry, so effectively you've paid for that CO2 reduction or removal. You know, when you talk about tax credits, like in the US, you do get tax credits to build renewable projects. That's all really about eroding the green premium. You know, when Bill Gates talks about eroding the green premium, we're trying to make the greener technology tends to be newer and therefore more expensive to make versus the existing incumbent technology. So you have to narrow the green premium. And so you can narrow it in lots of different ways. You can make the hydrocarbon more expensive by charging the cost of pollution. You can make the renewable more valuable by a REC. You're increasing the revenue as an electricity generator. If you're a hydrocarbon generator, you're just getting the price of the commodity. If you're a wind or solar generator, you're getting this extra piece on top, which is the REC. So those are both helping to narrow that premium. But the other way of narrowing it is through policy support and tax support. So that could be subsidy, tax credits. So that all goes into the equation of making it more sort of profitable to invest in the green versus the incumbent technology. So they're all important policy tools. They don't, you know, price signals alone, they're great, but if they're complemented by good policy like tax breaks and subsidy to get the new technology going, then they're sort of complementary tools and helps to sort of speed up the transition. The latest contract that we've launched in the environmental portfolio is our nature-based solution. NBT is the contract code. It's about pricing the positive externality of capturing and storing CO2 through natural capital. And you know, it's been hard work producing this contract because the market in the carbon credit space, the primary market, is nascent and needs to develop to really scale the secondary market. But we got a clear demand signal from our customers that they wanted a contract on ICE. There are other exchanges who list similar contracts, but we were told we really need something on ICE. So we had two big working dinners recently in London and New York to try and sort of cultivate this contract with our participants. There's a wide, diverse views as to what was needed. The real one of the real sort of issues in the market is there's no real standard in supply and demand cycle. So credits are issued you don't really know when they're issued, because sometimes they get batched up and the sort of the verification cycle can be elongated. So you don't really know when the supply is coming. And then, as we talked about earlier, there's not a standard retirement cycle. So it's quite difficult to then sort of forecast what's in the system. So our contract effectively will allow for people to trade single vintages, but it gives them a bit more optionality because of that risk of the supply and demand cycle not really being easily forecasted. So it should help sellers, because otherwise you'd be sort of worried about not having your credits issued in time to deliver to your buyer just because of this sort of credit issuance cycle.